Over the next 2 hours, both sides will make their final pitch.
After 9 o'clock, we'll talk to Labor leader Kevin Rudd, but after the break, Prime Minister John Howard will join us live.
Yeah, let's get it started. Let's get it started in here. Let's get it started. Let's get...
Ray Martin, boring. Kerry O'Brien, boring. Laurie Oakes, boring. Make no mistake, 70% of election coverages are boring.
They don't want to be reminded that they are
boring, boring, boring. We need nothing less than an election night revolution, and we need it now.
Australia wants no ads
until the results.
The team you can trust are making an election night for all Australians.
There's one thing
we all agree on. Vote for 7.
Who are you going to vote for?
Vote for 7. Come on, Australia. You know you want it.
It's your call. Tonight, 5:30.
Not authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
Good morning again, Chris. Now, what are voters telling you this morning?
Well, I can tell you, first of all, that voters are heeding the advice to vote early, at least at this booth. There was a queue even before the booths opened this morning, and now it's snaking its way through the grounds of the Eastwood Public School. We're on the western fringe of John Howard's seat of Bennelong. In terms of what voters are saying, well, that reflects very much that this is considered a very tight seat. It's a 50-50 viewpoint, and that viewpoint is often characterised by the fact that older voters believe that John Howard should stay. Younger voters, younger families believe it's time for change. There was even one voter who suggested there is a possibility John Howard could get the coalition over the line federally, but yet lose his own seat. Now, that would be interesting.
Now, just how tight is it going to be for him?
Well, it's a margin of 4.1% that the Liberals hold Bennelong, so it's tight. It's been made tight by a redistribution, which has included areas that would be prepared to look at the ALP at least. Maxine McHugh has fought a disciplined campaign. She's received enormous coverage, more coverage than any other challenger in any other electorate has received in the country, so it is going to be close.
OK, enjoy your day. Thanks, Chris. Reporter Chris Marr, thanks for joining us.
Welcome back. Well, if you're about to head off to vote, you may want to hear the final pitches from the men looking for your chit. Labor leader Kevin Rudd will join us after the 9 a.m. news.
But right now, let's get the final thoughts of John Howard. Prime Minister, good morning to you. Are you confident you'll still be leading the country at this time tomorrow morning?
I believe the coalition can win this election. I'm just saying to people who are undecided that if they believe that our nation is fundamentally heading in the right direction, then they should not vote for a change of government. Because whenever you change the government, you do change the direction of the country. You change its economic management, potentially affecting the living standards of the Australian people. This government I lead has delivered a stronger, a prouder and more prosperous Australian nation over the last 11 and a half years, and we have plans and ability to continue that. We're planning a further taxation relief to help with cost of living pressures. We're proposing a new education tax rebate to help with education expenses for children. We have proposals to build 100 new Australian technical colleges to bring back more skilled tradesmen into the Australian community. So it is a good story, and the country is heading in the right direction. And if people believe that, they should not vote for change, because there's always a risk with change that we will start heading in the wrong direction, particularly when the new government would be heavily dominated by trade union officials, and you'd end up having, for the first time in Australia's history, Labor governments in power at every single level.
Prime Minister, throughout the election campaign so far, if the polls are to be believed, many people who voted for you last time seem to have switched camp. Do you think that you've been battling a kind of it's time phenomenon, that people just want to change and they don't necessarily see the change to a Labor government as being a huge shift in the style of government this time round?
Well, Andrew, if the country were not heading in the right direction, that would be a sentiment, although I mightn't agree with it, I could understand. But people tell me, as I move around this country, that sure, there are problems and some people are missing out and there are cost of living pressures. I fully recognise that, but fundamentally, the country is heading in the right direction. Gee, we have a 33-year low in unemployment. As small businessmen and women say to me they can't get enough staff 10 to 15 years ago, they were talking about retrenching staff. I meet young people in shopping centres who are bubbling over with excitement about their job prospects and the options they have in front of them. Now, this is an Australia transformed from what it was 10 to 15 years ago. So we are heading fundamentally in the right direction.
Prime Minister, to those people who say that they may vote for Kevin Rudd today just because they think it is time for a change, do you see that in any way as being ungrateful? I mean, as you say, Australia is powering along. Do you see that as being ungrateful?
Look, it's not a question of gratitude. This is a democracy and people vote for whoever they want to according to their own assessment. But can I say to people who are thinking they ought to vote for the opposition because it's time for a change, it's never time for a change unless it's a change for the better. And if you believe the country is fundamentally heading in the right direction, then change can't be for the better. There's a risk in that change. And the Labor Party, when last in government, did leave us with a huge debt of $96 billion, and they have tried to frustrate our attempts to pay that off over the last 11 and a half years. They will be heavily dominated by the unions, and you will have wall-to-wall Labor government. So there is a risk. There's a risk to our economy. Now, if the economy was stagnant and in recession, I would understand the argument that it can't be any worse if you have a change. But when the economy is very strong, the argument for change is not compelling.
Prime Minister, we know you're a man of considerable composure, but you must have been livid over this fake leaflet scandal. How much damage do you think it's caused you?
Look, it was a silly thing, it was wrong, it was offensive, I've condemned it, and the people involved have been dealt with by the Liberal Party organisation with lightning speed. That sort of behaviour is not part of my campaign, it never will be part of a campaign of mine, and I completely disown it.
Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd spent a lot of time lately saying that today's a contest between him and Peter Costello and not you. How do you respond to those claims?
Well, how I respond is to simply say I am very fortunate that when the time comes for me to leave the Australian political scene, there can be a leadership transition if the government is returned to the second most experienced person in Australian politics. So I'd say this to Mr Rudd. Mr Costello has had a lot more experience in government than he's had. We've been a wonderful team, the longest-serving Treasurer Prime Ministerial team in Australia's history. And he's got the runs on the board. Mr Rudd's never made a hard economic decision in his life, and Peter Costello and I have made a whole string of them over the last 11 and a half years. And I think Peter Costello is an excellent contributor, a wonderful treasurer, and I've been very open about my future, and I think the Australian people appreciate that.
If the government is returned tonight, Mr Howard, presumably you'll want Mr Costello to have a long time in the top job before the next election so that the Australian people become used to his style of leadership. How will you determine when to hand over?
Well, there'll be a transition if the government's return, well into the next term. Now, the exact time, I don't know, and we haven't discussed or haven't
Certainly
decided.
Mr Costello will be pushing for a transition sooner, though, won't he?
No, look, Mr Costello and I will resolve this in a very, very amicable fashion. It'll be well into the next term, but the important thing is that there'll be a continuity of policy. Remember that Mr Costello and I together have put together the policies we've put to the people in this campaign. We've put together budget after budget, and we've delivered budget surpluses. We together have brought in the policies that have made Australia free of debt, all of which policies, incidentally, the Labor Party has trenchantly criticised and opposed, but now on the eve of the election says they actually believe in balanced budgets and they believe in debt-free Australia and they believe in budget surpluses. They haven't behaved like that over the last 11 and a half years.
Mr Howard, if the government loses tonight, will you remain as opposition leader?
Look, I am not focusing on defeat. I am flat out still in the remaining hours of this day to persuade people who may be undecided to vote for the coalition. So I'm not going to hypothesise about what happens if the government is defeated.
Oh, come on, Prime Minister. You must have discussed it with Mrs Howard and the rest of the family, have you?
What I'm telling you, mate, is I'm not hypothesising about it, OK?
OK, PM, we all have regrets in life. Your one big regret so far from your time in office, what would that be?
Look, I am not going to get into retrospectives. Retrospectives are about when your time and career has come to an end.
And we're not hypothesising about that, are we?
Positive vibe.
No, we are not. We're not being retrospective or hypothetical.
Mr Howard, how are you going
Neither.
how are you going to spend the day?
Well, I'm going to spend the day, you know, doing a few interviews like this, and then I will visit the polling booths in my own electorate and thank the people who have worked so magnificently for me over weeks and weeks, in some cases months. I mean, I've had a wonderful team of helpers. I've got hundreds of people manning polling booths throughout my electorate. It's a tough electorate. It's a marginal seat. It's only 4.1%. So I treat it with tender, loving care always. And I will be going around meeting voters, asking them to support me, thanking my workers, and I'll be doing that until 6 o'clock tonight, and then I'll come back and have a drink and wait for the results.
Well, it's a long day, so thanks for getting up early to having a chat to us this morning, Prime Minister. As they say in showbiz, break a leg.
Yes, good luck.
I'll do that.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Well, we've heard from the Prime Minister. In our second hour, the man who would be Labor leader Kevin Rudd will join us live. More than really positively chipper.
Yes.
Didn't you think?
Mate.
Yeah, mate. First time I've ever been called mate by a Prime Minister.
There's not a lot that can go wrong, hopefully.
No.
Now, like, it's out of your hands, isn't it? It's over to us.
It's out of my hands, that's for sure, yeah.
It's in my hands. I live in John Howard's
Oh, do you really?
seat.
Oh,
yes.
Been a long girl.
I was up a bit early this morning for this show, so I have to go back and vote.
I see. All right, well, he's hoping to be the boomerang
Power.
kid up at Bennelong.
and big queues, Kylie. Gee, so you have to go straight from here to vote.
I think I have to vote at the airport today, because I'm going straight from here down to Canberra.
I'm figuring I might do the 5 to 6, swing in really late.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Now to your election day weather. Some thunderstorms in Cairns today with a top of 31. Brisbane, there'll be a little bit of terrace and it'll be 26 degrees. That's Sydney, rain and 22 also, but it should be mostly fine, and 25 in Canberra for the count.
Sunny Saturday in Melbourne with a high of 22, fine and 26 in Hobart and Adelaide, a warm 35 degrees in Perth and an even hotter 36 in the top end.
I mean, this is what democracy's all about. Doesn't matter whether you're a game show host, a radio jock, a PR person, whatever you do, you can have an opinion. Prue, you're a betting woman?
I am not a bettor on this one, although I really think that the Howard government will get through. I actually think by about 3 or 4 seats, and I hope they do, because when you look at all the economic indicators from overseas, we cannot risk putting in a bunch of spin doctors, and that's what they are, and I'm a spin doctor, I can recognise it, people who are untried, untested, full of piss and wind, who have never had anything that they've said scrutinised by the media. And I urge everybody to think this is an intelligence test, and frankly, if we fail it, God help us all. And I won't be here tomorrow, I'll be on the train, I'll be on a plane out of here.
There's no proof, though. I mean, this alarmist line that the coalition keeps running, that as soon as the ALP is elected, the whole economy is going to fall over.
Why didn't it? It has in previous times when the Labor government's got in. And, you know,
don't think that had something to do with a fundamental restructuring of the nature of our economy over 10 years?
Well, who did that? Who got the debt down that we had? What, $90 billion worth of debt? Interest rates the way they were? I mean, the economy has never been booming.
Yeah, well, I've got to say, I agree with Prue about most certainly the media in this. I think that for more than a year, all it's been about is the opinion polls, and all it's been about is people in Canberra waiting for John Howard to do that one big thing to turn it around. And I also think that the really personal relationship that Kevin Rudd has built over 10 years with reporters is paying off as well. Lots of first-name calling going on. But also, the thing that frankly depresses me about the election, and this is not about having one of the horses in the race, is that this has become Australian Idol. It's not. It's about who's going to run the country. Not who's the nicest bloke, not who's the funniest bloke, not who's the bloke that can crack jokes with Kyle and Jackie O. Seriously, today, when you go in there, honestly think about this. Who do you want to run the country?
But I think that's a real shame, and I think you're right. I think it's a shame that it's become a popularity contest, an image machine, because, you know, behind those images there are obviously some serious and considerable issues that we as Australians have to address. Issues that define us. You know, even beyond the economy. You know, how we relate to the rest of the world on the question of, you know, for example, terrorism. How we relate to ourselves on the question of, for example, reconciliation. These things haven't been addressed.
Exactly. Where is this in the campaign? It's always about, and I've got to say, I yelled at the telly when Kevin Rudd just said, fundamentally, this is an election about him versus me. No, it's not. It's about a team of people who want to run the country, and as you say, what sort of a country are we? How do we want to represent ourselves? And I think the worst thing about this American-style campaign is that we cannot let in this country us become like the Americans, where we think one person is responsible for all your problems, or one person is the solution to all your problems. That's not the case. Think about the teams. Think about the deputies. Think about the person in the
local level. Have we lost perspective at the local level? I mean, do people think about their local member at all?
Not at all. Because the reality is, for the past 6 weeks, and this is the case, Prue, you know, every single time in the newspaper, it's been big splashes about who had more school kids wave at them, and the actual policy becomes a sliver down the side. And that's quite dodgy to me.
And it's a bunch of faceless people in the Labor side. I mean, who do we know? What do we know about these ministers who are suddenly going to be in control of these huge departments? It's just really scary.
But that's the argument. You will never change government. If you can't vote out a government because you don't know enough about the opposition, you will never change government.
Because they've been silenced. Because this has been such a clever and cunning campaign, and they used to throw that at Prime Minister Howard, but in fact they've been the ones
who unfortunately couldn't silence people like Kevin Andrews or Tony Abbott.
Tony Abbott.
Well,
he would have loved to have silenced Tony Abbott.
Julia Gillard, they've all been silenced. Lindsay Tanner, have you ever heard from him? These people are going to be representing us. We don't know a bloody thing about them.
Well, earlier in the show, John Howard joined us with his final pitch, as you saw.
So it's only fair that we hear from the other side. Kevin Rudd, good morning to you. Do you have a reason to smile today, Mr. Rudd?
Well, it's going to be a very tight race. That's probably the one thing Mr. Howard and I agree on. And this will be decided one way or the other by a nose. And that's how I feel and have felt all year.
Mr. Rudd, John Howard has used his final pitch here on Weekend Sunrise to say that changing the government today will fundamentally change the country. Is he right about that?
Well, Mr. Howard constantly runs this negative campaign which says if people out there vote for Kevin Rudd, that the sky will fall in by, you know, noon on Sunday. I mean, it's just a standard negative fear campaign which they run, they trot out every election. Remember last time, if you voted Liberal, then he would keep interest rates at record lows, and they went up 6 times since then. Look, what I've been on about throughout this campaign is outlining the fact that Australia needs new leadership now with a positive plan for the country's future. I've been doing that all year on education, on hospitals, on climate change, on water, on infrastructure, and also getting rid of work choices. But what we've had from the other side is a negative campaign because I think this government's best days are behind it.
Kevin Rudd, if you do become Prime Minister tonight, what is the first thing that you would do?
Well, what I've said so far, because climate change is such a huge challenge for Australia and for the world, is that if I'm elected as Prime Minister, we would set in motion all that's necessary to be done to ratify the Kyoto Protocol so that we get that practical cooperation on foot with global action on climate change. But you see, where this all goes is pretty interesting for today. I mean, you've had Mr. Howard on this morning, and formally, this election is between myself and Mr. Howard. The reality is it's between myself and Mr. Costello, because Mr. Howard said he's retiring. And whatever he said to the Australian people, he's not going to be around to deliver on it, because Mr. Costello will take over very soon. Mr. Costello then doesn't even have to face the Australian people now.
So,
we don't
Kevin,
know what his future
in
plans
your view,
are,
how does Peter
one.
Costello differ from John Howard?
Well, here is the million-dollar question. We don't have Mr. Costello's plans for the future. So what's happened here is effectively a backroom deal. You vote for Mr. Howard, Therefore, it is a vote for Mr Costello because he then gets the Prime Ministership of Australia on a plate without having to face the Australian people, and he hasn't had to put out what his plans are for the future.
But
The
Mr
one thing we
Howard
know
said
about
that
him, though,
they
is
made
work
the
choices.
plans together, so technically Peter Costello's plans would be the same as John Howard's, would they not?
Well, for 21 years, Mr Costello has been out there campaigning for the most extreme industrial relations system possible. And he has been a founder of an extreme industrial relations organisation called the H.R. Nichols Society. He's campaigned for the abolition of the independent umpire, removal of all protections for unfair dismissal, and things like that. Now, we know he would take work choices further. His plans beyond work choices, who knows? But I think very much today is Kevin Rudd versus Peter Costello because Mr Howard said he's retiring and Mr Costello then doesn't have to face the Australian people and he gets the Prime Ministership through the back door.
So on this question of industrial relations, Mr Rudd, now, first of all, Peter Costello has said that he won't change work choices, so is he telling us a bit of a porcupine on that one? And secondly, the coalition keeps making a big deal of Labor's close ties with the union movement. Is there anything wrong with a strong union movement?
Well, with Peter Costello, for 21 years throughout his professional and political life, he's campaigned to bring in an increasingly extreme industrial relations system. And he's already said that this is just the beginning, and other people in the government, like Senator Minchin, have said this is just the first wave and more's to come. Remember, prior to the last election, they said nothing about introducing work choices, and then they introduced it with huge impact on penalty rates, overtime, people trying to balance the family budget. So if they say this election they're not going to change work choices, well, just remember last election they weren't truthful about it either. It's a huge impact for working families under financial pressure if you're going to have your penalty rates and overtime stripped away.
Kevin Rudd, I'd quite like to know, just away from policy for a little minute, if you become Prime Minister, would you base yourself in Sydney or in Canberra, at Kirribilli or at the Lodge?
Well, first of all, I've got to try and win this election. I'm out there with my skates on today trying to do that. So, you know, haven't really thought all that through. But the policy of all previous Prime Ministers prior to Mr Howard, right back, I think, to the 20s and 30s, has been to have the Lodge in Canberra as the official residence of the Prime Minister, and that when they visit Sydney, then they stay in Kirribilli. That's always been the long-standing policy.
So you won't be getting down to the Morrison Co. wallpaper sale today?
But you know, Andrew, I've actually got to win this thing. This is a huge struggle. And here in my home state of Queensland, it's going to be really tight, not just in Brizzy, where I am now, but right up the coast. And
so
we need a good result in Queensland.
Then, Kevin, how will you be spending today?
Well, I'll be out helping my candidates across Brisbane as people go in to vote, because what I found in the last 24 hours, and I went through 3 shopping centres yesterday, is that right now there are still many people undecided about which way they're going to vote. And I would say this to them: if you're undecided about how you're going to vote, and maybe you've never voted Labor before, or you haven't voted Labor for a long, long time, I would say, if I'm elected as Prime Minister, as your Prime Minister, I would govern as Prime Minister for all Australians and govern in the national interest. That would be my firm undertaking to people out there considering that vote today.
Are you nervous today, Mr Rudd? Do you, within yourself, do you feel excited or nervous? How do you feel on a day like this?
Yeah. No, it's just another day. You just work and you get your message out, a positive message, to explain. You know, I think you just got to level with people about the things that you can change and how you'd change them. And that's why I keep talking about education and hospitals and climate change and water, that people know how we would make things better. It's a great country, but you've got to make it better. So I do that every day, and today's no different from yesterday or when I started this process a year ago. Australian people will make up their mind.
We asked Mr Howard when he was on before, Kevin, what he would do should he lose the election tonight. Would he stay on as leader? What would be his next move? So I guess I should ask you too. I mean, God forbid that you should lose the election, but if that happens, will you still be the Labor leader tomorrow morning?
Can I say, this is, I think, where Mr Howard and I are again on a unity ticket. We're just focusing on winning this election. So it's actually a serious point. All of your energy, physical energy, your mental energy, goes into putting out a positive message. And that goes right through until the polls close at 6 o'clock tonight. Then the people decide, the count will be made, and tomorrow's another day. We'll see what happens.
And, of course, you've got a big day tomorrow, Kevin. Let me remind you, you are a white ribbon ambassador, and tomorrow is the 25th of November, so no doubt you'll be out spruiking that all day too. Oh, what a weekend.
Whichever way it goes.
Well, White Ribbon Day is really important, and you've played a prominent role in that over the years, so it's really important to get out there in support of the cause.
Cheers. Thanks, Kevin, and good luck. Break a leg for tonight.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Sam.
Well, you're watching a special Saturday edition of Weekend Sunrise. Later this hour, we'll take you to the Nerve Centre in Canberra. Koshi and Mel will tour the Tally Room.
But next, Kylie Minogue has been immortalised in bronze, so why has the statue caused such a stir? I think I can see. Find out after the break.
The Prime Minister has made his final pitch to remain in the top job. John Howard has told Weekend Sunrise if voters decide to change the government, they risk changing the country.
It's never time for a change unless it's a change for the better.
Labor leader Kevin Rudd will give us his final word when we cross to him live after 9 o'clock.
Hello. 6 long weeks and finally it's voting day. What a campaign it's been. No hand left unshaken.
Hello, I'm Kevin.
Good morning.
Hi, Nana, it's Kevin Rudd.
No baby unhugged.
Give back to Mum.
Even the same babies. As retail democracy reached new and ridiculous heights.
Oh, you missed him.
There was excitement. And singing.
You do the hokey pokey and you turn around. That's what it's all about.
And singing with friends. Although they weren't all friends.
You're ignorant bastards, both of you.
Ouch! And how about this Glasgow kiss?
Yeah, I'm going, yes. He never had my vote, now he's definitely not getting it. I bet John Howard wouldn't do that.
But it could have been worse.
Have a bigger chunks of corn in my crap. Come here, I'm gonna eat you. Get in my belly.
There's been sidewalk surfing and opinion pole dancing.
These poles are like a merry-go-round. They come round, they up. They come round, they might be down.
Malcolm Turnbull took these kids for a spin. Oh, that's going to end in tears. Yep. And sometimes it's been hard to figure out what this show's been all about.
I think I can sum up the show for you with one word. Nothing. Nothing. Nothing.
Language was a problem. The PM gave us a new definition of sorry.
Well, I said that I was sorry they'd occurred. I don't think I actually used the word apology. I think there is a difference between the two things.
Yeah, and apparently there's a difference between what we're listening to and what we're hearing.
I listen to what you say, Mr. Riley.
and are you, Prime Minister?
And we all listen to Tony Abbott say sorry and apologise.
I am very sorry. I really do apologise. I am very sorry.
But he wasn't sorry about this. That's bullshit. Sometimes language was difficult to understand.
In life, you come across boys who are show-offs.
Oh, aren't they just?
Je suis le ministre des Affaires étrangères d'Australie.
Well, I can't speak Mandarin, I must say, but I've eaten one or two in my time.
And some ate their words.
They're trying to cover up. Excuse me. I just swallowed a fly.
There were some prickly questions.
Rourke wants to know who made cactuses. That is that's one of the great questions of life, actually.
And the sledge of the campaign goes to former Labor MP Brian Cortis.
Kevin Rudd couldn't go 3 rounds with Winnie the Pooh.
Now, that's an awful reflection on poor old Pooh.
He could be in big danger.
And the PM's walks took on a life of their own.
Here's something to help you keep your election up. It's called electoral Viagra, Mr. Howard.
So now it's over to the voters.
Smart politicians trust the voters, not the polls, after all. If you can't trust the voters, Whom can you trust?
Good question, Batman.
Tell me when you're ready to go, folks.
Are we what? Let's get ready to rumble!
Stand up, you principals, and stand for something. That just makes the fraud worse.
We've got the trawling and the dirt.
I can beat the Leader of the Opposition without resort to smears.
I wouldn't throw in the towel until the votes are counted.
And may the best political superhero win.
The trend of polling for the last 5 weeks, why was that? Who won the week? Certainly it can't have been due to the leaflets or anything, can it?
No, obviously not. But look, it's not unusual for the polls to tighten a couple of days out of the election, Andrew. And I think the final week, the objective is pretty simple. It's to get a simple, single message out there for voters, just to stick in their mind as they stand there today with the pencils hovering over the ballot cards. And you heard the PM, you know, what a wonderfully disciplined politician. 6 times in 3 minutes. If you think we're heading in the right direction, don't change the government. There's a risk. If you change the country, you change the government, you change the country. It's a pastiche of messages. Maurice Yemi used the heading in the right direction message quite effectively in the New South Wales election. Paul Keating used the other one about changing the government and changing the country in '96. Not to good effect. John Howard gave him a drubbing. But that's what the PM wanted to get out this week, a very clear message, and he was prevented from doing that for most of the week, a couple of days on the work choices documents, and the last couple of days, that just disgraceful campaign out there in Lindsay, that racist leaflet. And a lot of people in the Liberal Party are very angry about all that. So, and for Kevin Rudd, the objective this week was pretty much like the rest of the campaign, just to stand there as an alternative Prime Minister. My view is that people don't vote in oppositions as much as opposition leaders might think they do. They vote out governments. But to do that, they need to see someone on the other side who they can place in the Lodge and place at Kirribilli House and place on the world stage as a leader of the country. So Labor's objective essentially was to put that person forward and say, here it is. Okay, you didn't like Mark Latham. You tried to put Kim Beazley in there a couple of times, but you didn't quite get there. This guy, what do you think about him? And that's been the objective of the last 6 weeks. Look, there's been a lack of discipline too in the government campaign that surprised me. I mean, Tony Abbott's attack on Bernie Banton was just a brain snap. That was dumb. You know, then Mark Vaile attacking the Auditor General, dumb. And every time these things happen, you lose your message, and this is all about the message. You know, we saw that with the PM today. What a performance!
Yeah, Riles, $64,000 question. Who do you think's going to win tonight?
Look, Sam, even though the polls have tightened, the primary vote there still tells us that Labor has 44%. If that's true, then Labor will win. 16 seats is a heck of a lot of seats, but you can get to 12 seats like that. I think the Libs have given up about 9 or 10, and they're trying to hold on to those last, you know, six or so seats. But if it is 44% in the primary vote, then Labor will get across the line by at least a couple. It could be a late night, though. I'll be interested to see what happens in Western Australia. Labor's losing some confidence in the seat of Cowan out there, but thinks it might pick up Hasluck, and Stirling will be line ball. So it could be a late night if it's tight in the eastern states. But I still think you've got to place your faith in the polls. The polls have been telling us all year there is a mood for change afoot in the country. We'll see how that manifests today in the ballot box, whether it is a real mood. And if that primary vote for Labor holds up, they will get across the line.
I'm here at the Eastwood Public School, which is on the western fringe of the Prime Minister's seat of Bennelong. A few moments ago, Electoral Commission staff allowed voters to file in. The truth is, though, there was a very long queue of voters here hoping to exercise their democratic right nice and early, probably to free up the rest of their Saturdays so they could hit the shop straight away. Of course, there's a great deal of focus on Bennelong. And the thing that really strikes me about the booth today is I've rarely seen the amount of posters and how to vote placards festooned outside a polling booth before. Just underlines how important this seat is.
Has Maxine McHugh arrived yet, Chris?
She arrived just 2 minutes ago, in fact, Sam, and I quickly spoke to her. She's obviously very excited about the prospects of today, but the truth is the Liberal Party holds the seat by a margin of 4.1%. It's more winnable for the ALP thanks to a redistribution which has spread the boundaries of the electorate further west to include families with mortgages, younger families who are more prepared at least to have a look at the ALP. The truth is the Prime Minister, though, is still tipped to win the seat, but it's going to be very close. It's distracted the PM, it's distracted the Liberal Party during the campaign, and that was largely the ALP strategy, and it's worked.
Hey, lots of emails coming in. What have they said?
Yes, some positive and negative. One, Rona, says, if I'd wanted a sermon on how to vote, I would have gone to a Liberal Party get-together where they all pat themselves on the back. I hope to God you're on the first boat to China on Sunday morning.
Oh, yes. We're talking about Prue McSween there, of course, in our All-Stars this morning. Got a bit heated. Was one of the most exuberant weekend All-Stars I've ever seen.
She's an exuberant lady,
Another one here from Vanessa and Narrabeen. I can't believe you would get some washed-up wannabe from Beauty and the Beast.
Oh.
So that created television rage for the narrow-minded, insular views of the host.
Prue, if you're just having a slight crisis of conscience at home, there is a lovely one here from Veronica. Loved Prue this morning. She's great, and I agree with her. Let's not give the running of the country to a bunch who've not proved themselves. Go, Prue.
Yeah, you guys made a point at the time, though. Really great to see someone get passionate.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
About democratic rights.
So often it's so bland, Australian politics, isn't it? And this time around, people seem to be really getting into it. And, you know, thinking about it a bit more, which is good.
Prue is a passionate lady.
Thank you. Of course, a good move on Maxine's part, wearing that kabuki-themed blouse there to capture the much-taunted Bennelong Asian-Australian vote, don't you think?
She planned it that way. Now, of course, the election is the big story this morning, and for more on that and the rest of the news, here's Talitha Cummins.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Well, today's vote is shaping up as a cliffhanger, with the coalition clawing back at the ALP's lead in the final poll of the campaign. Newspoll has Labor at 52% on the two-party preferred, just 4 points ahead of the government. If the figures are correct, it could mean the result won't be known until late counting in Queensland and Western Australia. But as the parties have all been telling us all campaign, the only poll that matters is today's, as 13.5 million Australians cast their vote. Both leaders will deliver their final pitches on this morning's program when we chat to them live. And 7 News has your most complete election coverage, starting with a special edition of 4:30 News this afternoon. Then join Koshi and Mel and Australia's best no-spin panel as the count begins. Your Call 07 kicks off at 5:30 in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, from 5 o'clock in Adelaide and 4:30 in Perth. The father of the latest Australian soldier killed in Afghanistan says he's distraught but very proud of his brave son. Private Luke Worsley was shot during a raid near the Australian base at Tarin Kot. The 26-year-old was part of a special operations group targeting a Taliban bomb-making centre. He's the third Australian soldier to die in Afghanistan in less than 2 months.